and we sort of poured a glass of wine each, and we were like, sod this, let's go do something else. You're just walking along through a jungle and all of a sudden there's an orangutan there, and they're more impressive in person than you can kind of possibly imagine. People rent stalls in the morning, and like one dude might do it on a Monday, and he might have the best, I don't know, hoisin duck on a Monday morning, and if you miss him, you can't find him again. There's a proposal and the room erupts in cheers and chants of USA, USA goes on. And as my wife is clapping, sort of smiling politely at the new couple, she leans over to me and she says, "I'd absolutely hate it if you did that to me."
Christian, hi. It's great to have you on the podcast, mate. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm fine, thanks. Alex, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you, mate. Just getting used to this weird lockdown life that we're living.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's the stage 2 of lockdown isn't as fun as I thought it was going to be. I kind of went into it very optimistic, but like, it's only 4 weeks, we'll be fine. And it's sort of we're 2 weeks in now, and I'm like, okay, I would very much like this to finish. But I got a dog. I did the classic lockdown thing of getting a dog, so we've been able to take her for walks, which has actually been quite nice to get out of the house compared to lockdown 1 where we were stuck in our flat.
Oh, amazing. What breed?
She's a German white-haired pointer, which is a far bigger dog than my house warrants, if I'm honest. We've got a little 2 up and 2 down, and she's a big breed.
Oh, nice, man. Awesome. So I wondered if we could start by giving the audience a little bit of an insight into how we met each other.
Okay, yeah, cool. I can do that. So we met in 2016 when you were having a jolly in Barcelona, and I worked very hard to make sure you had a good time, which isn't completely true. You were with Tubes, and we were there as part of a football sponsorship tour, like event. So I was part of the staff there, running the social media for my client, who was hosting you, Tubes, and a few other celebrity influencers. And we spent 4 days in Barcelona and finished it off playing on the Camp Nou, which was, I think, still a pretty remarkable memory.
Yeah, Tubes actually spoke about that in his episodes and actually described it as the greatest work experience he's ever done in his entire life. So that's good from you.
Yeah, I mean, it was remarkable. I mean, Tubes was a ridiculous football player. I remember thinking, because I hadn't met him, whereas Gertz, David Gertie, who was working on, or was my boss at the time on the event, had obviously knew Tubes through football, and he's like, "Oh yeah, Tubes is an unbelievable footballer. You won't believe when you see him when he gets to football by his feet." And we're like, "Okay, yeah, fine." We went to the Barcelona training ground, which was again another ridiculous situation, and we had all of the sort of competition winners and the influencers having a training session with Barcelona coaches. You were just pinging balls left, right, and centre, doing crossbar challenges like it wasn't anything. And yeah, then I think we had sort of 4 really nice meals out, including dinner on the Camp Nou pitch, which was just remarkable. And then the match where I got embarrassed in goal and had to just sub myself off, just took myself off and went and sat down on the sidelines because there's no way that I should have been on that pitch.
Oh, awesome experience, but we'll move swiftly on from that. And I want to ask the question which I ask everyone at the start of the pod. How important is travel to you? So
travel is massively important to me. And one of the biggest frustrations we've had this year is we haven't been able to travel. It's massive for me. I think growing up as a kid, me and my family didn't travel a huge amount. We sort of did the classic, a couple of weeks in France, a couple of weeks in Portugal, which is where my parents now live. And we did the occasional big holiday where we went to Florida. But sort of as I got older into my teens, I started doing ski trips to schools, and then sort of into early adulthood, where myself and my partner and her family went to sort of Asia. And then obviously when you start working, going to weekend breaks, all of a sudden your horizons open. You realise how big the world is, but also how familiar everything is and how similar everyone is. And for me, it's one, helped me who I am today. I think it's given me the confidence to sort of to be who I am, and likewise the experiences I've had from traveling are things I reference every single dinner party or every single get together. And I'm a big foodie as well, so that's a major part too.
Awesome, man. So the main reason that I wanted to get you on the pod today is because you did something which I'm very envious of, and hopefully at one stage in my life I'll do, is go traveling around the world for 9 months with your girlfriend. So I wanted to give us an overview as to where you went and the countries which you visited.
Yeah, okay. So I think the first thing to think about is sort of that 9 months. It was a real knee-jerk decision. I think it was a particularly tough day in like February. me and my now wife, a girlfriend at the time, came back to work. We were both living in London, and we sort of poured a glass of wine each. We were like, "Sod this, let's go do something else." And we sort of planned it. And now, initially, we were going to do like a whole year around the world, and we were going to try and get to South America as well. But once we sort of did the numbers and looked at the sort of I guess the itinerary that we were going to do, we just realised it wasn't going to be feasible. So to come back to your original question, where we went was we flew from London to India. We had a month in India. We went from India to Thailand, travelled up the north of Thailand, crossed over into Vietnam, down Vietnam into Cambodia, Cambodia to Malaysia, Malaysia back to Thailand, Thailand to Hong Kong, Hong Kong to China, China to Singapore, Singapore to Indonesia, Indonesia to Australia, Australia to New Zealand, New Zealand to the west coast of America. Oh, sorry, Fiji to west coast of America. We spent 6 weeks on west coast of America, and then we flew to Chicago, then flew to New York, and then flew back to London.
Absolutely smashed it, by the way, because I went through your Instagram on the preparation for this and rattled down all the countries and wanted to make sure and see if you got it right, and you got it absolutely spot on. Good memory.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I mean, there's a little grey gap between China and Southeast Asia where we were just darting about all the time. So yeah, okay, I'm glad I got the list right.
So before we start talking in depth about what that kind of trip was like, you alluded to it there, the fact that you thought kind of, sod this, we're just going to pack everything up and go traveling for 9 months. I wanted to ask you what kind of commitments you had in the UK to leave behind.
We actually didn't have any. We were renting a flat in London. Other than quitting our jobs, which was obviously quite a big decision. We don't have any pets. We had family members, but we weren't missing any big birthdays. We didn't have any close friends' weddings coming up. We don't have any children. So in terms of commitments, we didn't have a mortgage, which is another thing. We didn't really have any, and I think that was a big driver for us. Myself and my wife, we'd gone straight from school to uni, straight from uni into work. We hadn't done that sort of typical thing which a lot of our friends have done, which was have a gap year between school and uni, or have a gap year after uni. So we didn't feel like we were missing out, but we definitely realised that we wanted to sort of see a bit more of the world before we settled down, got a house, had kids, got a dog, which is nearly the situation I'm in at the moment. So in terms of commitments, we didn't have any. That said, if people do have commitments outside of work, I don't think it should stop you. When we were traveling, we met people who had babies. We met people who were working as they were traveling. We met people who had rented their house out for an entire year. So I think the way that modern life is now, and particularly now, the way we all connect through Zoom, I don't really see there being an issue in people sort of dropping everything and going away and experience a bit of the world.
I wanted to ask you though, it must have been a difficult decision to perhaps leave your family, your friends. How tough was that for you?
Well, so I think it was slightly easier for me because at that time my parents had just moved to Portugal themselves, so they'd had a sort of holiday home there for a few years, and I think a similar decision made by my mum one day where it was particularly rainy in December. She was like, "Oh, it's 22 degrees in the Algarve. Why don't I go live there?" And just one of those timings which worked well for them. So in terms of me like leaving my family behind, it wasn't too fiddly. I think for my wife who is close with her family, it was a little bit harder, but likewise we knew it was only going to be 9 months. We were living in London, we were seeing our family only semi-regularly. Our friends were all starting to move away and not be so centralised, and so again we kept in touch. We had an Instagram account, people could follow us as we went around the world. We actually met up with a few of our friends as we went. One of them was working in San Francisco when we were there, so we met up with them. One of my close friends from school was actually teaching in Vietnam, so we went and saw them. So we weren't we were still keeping in touch with people, and it wasn't a deciding factor. The quitting the job was more of the issue, because we didn't know whether we'd be able to get one when we came back. But actually, both workplaces took it pretty well. So
brilliant. So I was going to mention your job. It says on your LinkedIn that you took a sabbatical. Is that correct?
No, I quit my work and got a new job when I came back. So I was working for a sports sponsorship company, the one that I was working at when I met yourself, and then I left, and my initial fear of not having anything when I came back was unfounded. I had a few job opportunities and a few job offers. The one that I'm currently working on in my sort of social media role is the one which I got pretty soon after coming back. So it all kind of worked out for the good. There was a couple of months where we weren't working, but we were living with family or George's family, and we had a little bit of money left over, so we could keep ourselves ticking over when we got back, and that was part of the plan as well. So yeah, worked out in the end.
Yeah, nice, man. And you mentioned the fact that it was a kind of knee-jerk decision, but obviously you can't just do this kind of thing overnight. How long was it kind of playing on your mind as, okay, I want to pack this all in and go traveling around the world?
Well, if we talked about going traveling for a while, but it was always a next year thing, a next year thing. That sort of decision in February, where we both sort of looked at each other over a glass of wine and went, stuff this, really was like a genuine knee-jerk reaction. It was like, okay, well, let's just do it. I think that was on Tuesday night. On the Saturday, we went to SDA Travel and Trail Finders, picked up all the brochures that we could, took them home, started planning out an itinerary, and then we took it from there. So I think we decided in the February of 2016. So I was probably planning it when we were in Barcelona together. And we left in the March of 2017, and we saved up all the money between then and there. We moved home for a little bit and saved a little bit more money as well, which is obviously we were in quite a fortunate position to do so. But yeah, it was relatively knee-jerk. I remember us telling our friends and then being like, well, that's quite, myself and my wife are usually quite seen as sort of steady Eddie, safe pair of hands, don't really do anything too chaotic. And sort of our friends, even the more chaotic group, being like, oh, that's a brave decision. I'm really jealous. And still none of them have done the same thing.
Yeah, it is a brave decision, mate. I respect you for it. You mentioned planning your trip and the fact you were doing for quite a while. How did you come up with the exact route and plan that you would take?
We picked a couple of places based on the likelihood of us being able to do it again in the future. So especially in Asia, we knew that in 10 years' time, if we had kids, it's just going to be a hard trip to take. So we wanted to spend as much time as possibly could there. Similarly with India, neither of us had been to India, or my wife's family, or my wife's dad was born there. As part of it, his dad was an expat and they moved back to London. So there's always been sort of an intrigue both from her side, and also I it's quite a romantic place to go to. So we were pretty keen to do that. And likewise, if you're going to travel around halfway across the world, you might as well stop off in India going that direction, because it's such an incredible place to go and see. So I think India was like the starting base, and we were like, okay, where do we want to go next? Okay, so you then look at Central Asia. It's like nowhere really stands out for there. So okay, let's go to Thailand, and then you do the classic backpacker route of Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and then we actually weren't planning to go to Malaysia at all. But when we were in Thailand, we realised we were getting around much quicker than we expected, and we'd have some spare time. So we're like, okay, well, if we just go here, we can fly over and then fly back to Bangkok for roughly the same price as it would cost us to get back to Bangkok anyway. So we should just do that. And then we wanted to go to China because, again, similarly, other side of, if you're on that side of the planet, you might as well go to it. And we kind of sort of just pointed in a direction, just carried on going that way. Yeah. So I don't think there was much more thought into it really, other than if you're in that area, you might as well go to the next area rather than sort of jetting all the way back. And that's the trouble we had with South America, because the decision was, do we go from Australia, New Zealand to South America and then come home? But that adds, like, South American transportation isn't particularly reliable. So we would have only had like 6 weeks of our budget when really we needed 3 months of the budget. So we're like, okay, actually we can go to the States and drive around, and we get much more of an experience there doing things we need to in 6 weeks, rather than if we sort of were, starting in Chile, working our way up through Argentina and just being on buses all the time. So we decided that there'd probably be places in South America, be it Buenos Aires or Rio de Janeiro, that we could go to as adults, and it'd be slightly, the time difference is slightly more favourable, so it'd be easier to do.
Yeah, so you mentioned the fact that in Thailand you were getting through a bit quickly, and perhaps you've adjusted your plan there. I wanted to ask, that plan that you set out and to actually achieve, did you stick to it, or was it quite fluid?
Southeast Asia in particular was super fluid, so we literally didn't plan. We had like key flights, which is basically the flights we had to hit as part of our wider travel agreement. So I think it was like London to Delhi, Mumbai to Bangkok to Hong Kong. I think that might have been it, and then Singapore to Indonesia to Australia to New Zealand, and then basically the whole way around. Other than those flights, we could do it wherever we wanted, and we had a rough idea what we wanted to do, but it was relatively straightforward. We were booking flights like sort of 2 or 3 weeks out. So when we flew to Bangkok, we didn't really know where we were going to go. We knew we were going to go north. We knew we were going to go to Vietnam, but we didn't know if we were going to go to Laos. We didn't know if we were going to go to Cambodia. So other than booking trains sort of every 2 days in advance, and then booking flights when we needed to make internal flights, we had a pretty fluid plan, but with like sort of key days that we know we needed to be in the city by.
Yeah, so hostels and stuff you completely did when you arrived in a location?
we sort of tried to plan 2 cities in advance. So I think when we were in Mumbai, before we went to Goa, we were planning Bangkok because we knew we'd be in Bangkok for 4 days, but then we'd arrive at Bangkok, we'd probably we'd land, go around the neighborhood, have something to eat, and then we'd sit down at our laptop for 2 hours and kind of decide where we wanted to go to next with a rough idea, knowing what we'd want to do. We've also, trying to sort of not travel all the time, because you can get into a little bit of habit of being like, okay, and today we're going to go here, and then the next day we're going to go here, and then all of a sudden you spend an entire week traveling and you haven't seen much. Yeah, hostels were being booked about, at worst, a week in advance.
So I want to move on to an element of travel, which I'm sure people will be really interested in, and that is, of course, money. You sent me across the most detailed spreadsheet I've seen in a long, long time for this pod. Really appreciate it. The kind of research I want to do. My girlfriend absolutely loves it as well. Complete Excel nerd. She was going through it, loved it. So it had details of your food, how much it would cost, your travel, your hotels, everything, which is awesome for me to prepare for this. How much did you save to do the whole trip?
I think if you include everything, so that's sort of all the hostels, all the food, our money for when we came back traveling as well, emergency fund, a cost of our sort of rental vans, I think all in it was £22,000 or £23,000 for 2 of us. So yeah, I mean a decent amount of money to be fair. But likewise, 9 months, 11 grand each, about £1,400 per month.
And to save that kind of money, how did you find that?
Fiddly. Yeah. But then we were in London for 10 months, so we were already saving a decent amount. I started walking to work a lot more than getting buses and tubes. We stopped eating out as frequently. Our lifestyle didn't suffer too much, but we did make a couple of like lifestyle choices. We wouldn't go to very expensive restaurants. We just go to some like nice medium price restaurants. Yeah. And then likewise, we were both quite lucky that year where we both got a bonus. And then we moved home. We moved to George's parents for a couple of months before we went, which allowed us to kind of just not do anything other than we had commuting costs and we had travel savings, and that was it. And those last 3 months were the ones which really ramped up our capability to save up and had enough. And we had a little bit, we had, in fairness, Bank of Mum and Dad, if we did get into emergency situation, which we didn't get into. But it took a while, but it wasn't particularly difficult, I don't think.
Yeah, so 22 grand for 2 people. I don't want to sound out of touch, but it seems achievable if it's a goal that you really, really want to achieve. Mm-hmm. But do you think you could have toned it down? So, for example, if people are listening to this and they're kind of thinking, oh, that's perhaps a little bit outside of my budget, could you have done it cheaper?
Yeah, 100%. So we stayed in like probably the higher end of hostels. We probably had a private room most of the time because we've been together 10 years. We're a couple in their 20s. We don't want to be sharing 8-bed bunks with a load of teens. So you could definitely do it cheaper. But that all said, we were pretty shoestring. Like when we were in the States in particular, we were having, we were cooking for ourselves most of the time. We weren't really eating out. You can make savings, but then you make sacrifices about where you want to do as well. So if you want to go camper vanning in Australia, then you're going to probably be paying $25 per campsite. So that's cool. If you've got money, if you don't want to do that, you can go free campsite. But if you don't free campsite, you're probably not going to have a shower. It's probably not going to be an area which is going to be particularly touristy. So you're going to miss out on a couple of sites. And again, it comes back down to the point. It's like you could do that trip in half the time, but you're smashing it around and you're traveling all the time. And we felt that budget gave us a good balance of being able to do things we wanted to do while also not being plush and not staying in hotels and not having somebody pick up our luggage for us and take us to and from the airport all the time. It was backpacking, but with enough money that we were able to do the things we wanted to do.
And was that a goal of yours to kind of make sure that it was proper backpacking? Because of course, as you kind of get a bit older and you move into your 20s, you kind of think, oh, I could avoid the hostels, could go for the hotels, could go for the first class trains. Was it an intent of yours to make sure that you saw proper backpacking?
I think it was a result of the plans that we had around where we want to stay. So we didn't want to stay in hotels particularly because when you are traveling as a couple for 9 months, you do want to have a little bit of like people to socialize with as well. You don't want to be stuck in a hotel room all the time. You want to have a common room space. You want to be in a younger area, which is invariably where most of the hostels end up being. We don't want to be going to Ritz-Carltons and having we just don't need it. So once you make that decision, it's quite easy to then commit to hostels. So yeah, I think that we definitely targeted places based on, okay, are we going to have a good time here, or are we going to kind of end up just being a bit alone again? And I think from that culture, you do end up doing a bit of backpacking. I mean, yeah, there were times where things were a bit ropey, but yeah, it's part of the experience, I think.
Yeah. And just going back to the spreadsheet, you set out quite a detailed method of trying to budget on a daily basis. Did you stick to that?
Roughly. So what the budget allowed us to do is, okay, on one day we know, okay, we're going to do this activity, which is over budget for the activity, but we're not going to do an activity the next day. So we can take it from there. We could input the money and it would basically tally down. So the next day you knew you had a little bit more budget. The budget was based on, I think, it was either Lonely Planet or SDA Travel basically gave us a cost of your average hostel cost, your average cost of food per day, and your average activity cost. And that's all it basically is. And we just put it in, we tallied it all up and we went, okay, well, that's going to be a pretty good estimate of what we're going to be spending. And it ended up being, pretty close to what we did end up spending. There'd be a couple of days where we wouldn't do any paid for activities, but we'd spend a little bit more on food, or we'd go on a food tour or something. So it ended up being slightly different. But we did update that spreadsheet every day for 9 months. So
yeah. What was that like?
Yeah, fine. Yeah, again, I think you just get used to planning all the time. Because we had my laptop on me, so we were looking at places to go. You're looking for restaurants, you're looking for hostels, you're looking at train times to get to the next place. So it doesn't take long to open a Google sheet and go, okay, well, what did we spend yesterday? Okay, 200 baht. Cool, just put that in, and there you go, and you're updated and ready to go with where you need to next.
Brilliant. And from all of the countries that you did visit, they're going to be some cheaper and some more expensive. What did you find to be the cheapest country, and what did you find to be the most expensive country from your trip?
Ooh, interesting. Most expensive country we went to was the US, which probably the US and Australia were particularly expensive. Again, New Zealand was also a similar price. I think the cheapest one is probably either China or Cambodia. Cambodia was really cheap because it's just less touristy and less developed than we are here. Although there are some places which just end up being pricey because you're on an island and it's the only place you can go to the island, so therefore they're going to charge you twice as much as they would otherwise. But in Southeast Asia generally was the same price again. But it's difficult, isn't it? Because if you're going to go do something relatively touristy, you're going to end up paying probably slightly more than you would normally. Likewise, if you're in India and you go to a local restaurant where the guide is taking you, it's going to be quite cheap. But if you end up going to the restaurant which has got all the white people in, you're going to end up paying a little bit more. So it's just about being sensible. You could go to any country and spend any much as you want. You just have a different experience depending on how much you go up by. So but I think Cambodia and China in particular were noticeably probably under budget from what we put in.
And I think I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Did you work at all during your trip?
No, we made the decision to just not do any work. We were like, I think if we'd got into a point where we were really hard up for cash, we probably would have stuck it out in Australia, do a couple of weeks farming or whatever. But no, we'd worked hard in the 10 months beforehand to make sure we didn't have to work when we were there, which is the point. I think when we got into December and we were getting ready to head home, we both started sort of updating our CV a little bit and doing a little bit of I guess life admin, which isn't work. We weren't being paid for it, but I think we started realizing we had to get a little bit more serious about things then. So, but no, other than that, no work at all.
And I want to talk about the accommodation you had, because an array of accommodation. So you've got hostels, you've got camper vans, overnight trains. What was the decision behind each of those?
Basically, if we're staying in the city, we'd be staying in a hostel. The camper van, if you're going to go somewhere like Australia where the infrastructure isn't as good as it is maybe in Western Europe around sort of trains and buses, then you can get a camper van and you can arrive in Cairns and you can drive it one way to Sydney, and it will cost you X amount. You know how much you have to pay up front. That's done and dusted, and then you can go wherever you want. And that sort of freedom in those places was good. We could have got a Greyhound bus, which is kind of good. You're going to go Cairns, then you're going to go to stay in Queensland and Brisbane and then a couple of other places, but you're not going to have the freedom that we were looking for. The overnight trains were basically a way for us to save money on travel, because we would then save the cost of a hostel. So in Vietnam, you can get a 12-hour overnight train, which will take you down the coast. That's a train journey we're going to have to make anyway, so we might as well do it and sleep as well. And generally speaking, the overnight trains were pretty good. The one in Vietnam was slightly awkward when the three, it was me, my wife, and three other Vietnamese dudes, and they all just started smoking from midnight to 4 a.m. just in this compact thing. It was a rickety old thing, and I was on the top bunk, and every time it shook, I was convinced it was going to sort of smash down on top of Georgia. And they smoked the entire night, and it's just one of those things. We tried to tell them no, and they were like, "No, we're just going to carry and do it." But they at least opened a window, which when they first started doing, they hadn't done. Yeah, I don't think I got much sleep that night. I watched an unbelievable amount of Lemony Snicket on Netflix because it's all I had downloaded on my phone. Whereas the overnight train we had in China, which I think was Chengdu to Xi'an. We had a sort of a mum and her daughter. She was going to try to see family. Again, didn't speak a word of English, but was sort of offering us noodles and dumplings. And again, because she had their 8-year-old daughter, they were asleep by 11 a.m. and we didn't have anything to worry about. So the main reason we do overnight trains is to save money. But again, you see more of the countryside, you see more of the people than you would otherwise. And generally, they're pretty reliable as well. So
yeah. And what class did you travel in?
I think the Vietnamese trains were first class. Because it's like first class sleeper where you get a bed, or standard sleeper where you just get a seat. So we're like, okay, we actually want a bed, and it wasn't the price difference wasn't huge. And then in China, I don't think it was like the top class, but it was one below it. Which again, you get a bed, you get a little bathroom. We could have gone up to first class if we wanted, but we similarly, you don't want to feel like you're trying to avoid everything all the time. So we were just like, we'll just go there, and it was great. And generally travel, we on trains during it, we just got the standard class. I think the only time we did we got sort of bumped ourselves up to was extra leg room on a 6-hour bus journey in Malaysia. Personally, because I'm 6'2" and Malaysians aren't the tallest people, so I was like, I need the extra leg room.
Yeah, smart decision, I think. And talking about your camper van experiences, I tallied up on the spreadsheet that you did a total of 11 weeks in camper vans across 3 different countries.
Yeah.
How did you find that?
Mixed. Australia was really good because the weather was nice, and Australia is a country which is really set up for camper vanning. It's something they obviously do. It's something which expats and tourists do. So most places you go to, you're going to get a place you can cook, a place you can shower, and also some seclusion so you can get a good night's sleep. And that's not just from the paid campsites, but also they have pretty good free campsites, even in their national parks, or sort of just on the side of roads where it's actually pretty good. New Zealand again has a similar setup, although at this point we're sort of in the spring of New Zealand, it was getting a bit colder. Whereas in the States, I think it's only in California where they legally have to give you a shower.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There weren't as many free campsites. You either had to go to the national park, which would cost you a bit of money, or you didn't find a campsite, and what you end up doing is sleeping in Walmart car parks a lot. And that's not a idiot Christian's gone and slept in a Walmart car park. It's you drive past Walmart at 9 p.m. and there are lots of camper vans getting ready to stay there for the night because Walmart are happy to let you there stay overnight. It's 24 hours. There's a security guard on. There's cameras. It's actually a pretty good place to go and sleep overnight. But there was a particular period where I don't know why, but we didn't have a shower for 5 days, and it was like, we need to stop this. We need to find somewhere where we can have a shower and cook some hot food because this is getting ridiculous.
Yeah. So is it overall a method of transport and accommodation which you would recommend?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. You can't not drive in the States. There's no trains. There's no, if you can fly to places, but again, that's going to be really expensive. You could rent a car and get in motels, but again, the cheapest motel is going to be $65 a night. Whereas I think our camper van was $45 a night, maybe even less, maybe like £39 a night. I don't remember, but you just have to do it. So in the States, 100%, in Oz, 100%. Again, in New Zealand there's probably less places you can go to. So if you wanted to kind of drive for a day, stay in a hotel, drive again, then that's fine. But again, we had a camper van, it was big, we had a bed, most campsites were pretty cheap, you got cooking places, we were going out for dinner anyway, so it worked out all right.
Yeah, awesome. And in terms of accommodation overall, are there any tips that you'd give in terms of maybe arriving in a location and booking a hostel or getting good deals?
Sure. So there are 2 websites we used predominantly. One was called Ocado.com and the other one was Booking.com. Booking.com, generally speaking, had the best prices. And if they didn't have the best price, they'd price match. And the other thing that Booking.com which is really helpful, is once you do a certain amount of bookings, I think it's 10, you get Genius membership, which allows you to cancel up to in some places 2 hours before. So if you have a last change of plans, you can, and that Genius membership is for life. So we were actually due to go to Japan back in March for our belated honeymoon, and we literally, I think we were due to fly on the 17th of March, and it was peak COVID time, so we didn't go. But all of the hotels hotels I'd done through booking.com, and I was able to cancel straight away, so we didn't have to pay anything, which bearing in mind we cancelled sort of 2 days out from having to leave was pretty impressive. So those were the main sites. And then what we tended to do was just cross-reference the websites to make sure that the places were legitimate. And similarly, we used a couple of travel websites like lonelyplanet.com to see who they were recommending, and then sort of we'd have 2 or 3 we'd look at, and then we'd look at the area and decide which one we'd go to based on that.
Brilliant, mate. So I wanted to move on to the things you did, because some of the photos you took on your Instagram, and also just from, again, I don't want to bring up the spreadsheet too much, but the spreadsheet pulled up some amazing things, which I would absolutely love to do. So Taj Mahal, the cooking classes, forest monkey tours, Thai boxing in Bangkok, first seals in Milford Sound. Did you have a list of everything you wanted to do?
Not really. I think there were some obvious ones, like you can't go to sort of Delhi and not make the trip to go see the Taj Mahal because you'd be an idiot not to. Similarly, Thai boxing, we made the decision when we got there because it was recommended. The Great Wall of China was another one we wanted to do because, you're going to go to Beijing, why not go do it? So a lot of them were sort of coincidental in respect of, well, if you're going to go to this place, you might as well go do the big thing that's there to do. But otherwise, most things were pretty random. I think the only thing we sort of detoured to make sure we did was I wanted to go see the orangutans in North Sumatra, and that was like one thing we went and we were like, okay, if we go to Indonesia, then we're going to have to go up here to do it, and then we're going to have to come back down. So that's probably the only place we were like, okay, we're going to this specific place to do this specific thing, and then we're leaving again. But again, I mean, that was just ridiculous. It's just the most insane experience. You're just walking along through a jungle, and all of a sudden there's an orangutan there, and they're more impressive in person than you can kind of possibly imagine. So I think I also had a bit of climate change and deforestation in my head around it. I was like, I want to make sure I see them before. So I can tell my kids that I did see them in case they do go extinct. So, but other than that, it was kind of a little bit just like on a whim. Like we'd see something like, oh, I see that. The one thing I did get obsessed with was whales in Australia. So we just happened to be driving down Australia at the same time as the whales had their southerly migration. So the whole way along, as we're driving along the coast, and the main road in Australia along the east coast is literally, for most parts of it, next to the sea, and then you'd sort of come inland and there'd be a city, and then you come back out and you'd be against the sea again. We'd be seeing these whales the whole time. I just got weirdly obsessed, and every time we had an opportunity to get on a boat and go see some whales, I was like, come on, it's only $40, let's go and see some whales. And we got quite fortunate. We saw sleeping humpback whales and a few other things. We packed a lot of experiences in. It
sounds incredible, mate. Do you have a favorite from all of those?
Question. The Thai boxing was really fun because I think back to your point earlier about making a conscious decision to be backpackers. All the white people were ringside, like as close to boxing as you could, and we made the conscious decision to be like, no, we don't want to do that. We want to be in amongst it with the normal crowd, and we did that, and that was just an insane experience where I had sort of Thai men trying to bet with me, and I was like, dude, I don't even know what's going. I don't know how to score points for this. I'm just enjoying the chaos. And they had a very weird betting system where you sort of caught someone in the eyes, you showed them how many fingers, and that would be a bet. And I was like, we're just trying to avoid looking at anyone the entire time we were there. So that was a pretty mad experience. India just is pretty crazy. There's just so much history everywhere, like just everywhere. I think if I had to pick 2 things that I'd do again, the orangutans for me was a highlight. And likewise, the Great Wall of China was spectacular. And we went to the part of the wall which hasn't been rebuilt. It's like you can kind of just go wild hiking on it, and it sounds stupid because it is called a Great Wall, but I mean it is really just it just goes on as far as the eye can see, and you walk for 4 hours. And it just carries on going, and there's no end in sight to it. So I would thoroughly recommend, if anyone ever goes to Beijing, to make the decision early on to get out there and see it.
Yeah, I'm planning a trip to South Korea next year, fingers crossed, to see a friend.
Oh, fun.
Would you recommend taking that trip to Beijing from South Korea whilst I'm there?
Oof, I don't know. It's again difficult because I mean, I guess you could probably be off for like maximum 10 days, right?
Yeah, 14 probably.
Okay, so if you were able to pop over to Beijing to do 4 days, and we didn't do all of Beijing, but we saw a decent chunk of the touristy attractions in 4 days. So you can definitely do it, but getting a visa there is a bit of a nightmare. You might not even be able to get a visa via South Korea. You tend to have to get it in advance. We were quite lucky because we went via Hong Kong, which was a conscious decision because in Hong Kong you can get one in like 3 days. So we went to the visa office, got our visa. Did all the forms, pictures, showed them that we were planning to leave. they then went and got our visas, and we went and got it stamped and went back in. But I think any other routes, it can be quite fiddly.
Good to know, mate. I would have no idea. So you saved me a lot of hassle. So you mentioned at the start that you're a foodie, something I would classify myself as well. So I'm going to pick your brains on this one because I can't wait to hear about it. How much money did you give yourself to spend on food?
I think it was like 20%, 25%, something like that. Like it was a decent size. But again, we went with the intention of eating like locals do. We didn't go with the intention of going to sort of some of the fancier restaurants in places, which actually I think I kind of regret a little bit, because if you're anything like me, where you watch various Netflix documentaries about food places around the world, every now and then something will come up. It'll be like, oh, we were in Bangkok and we totally should have gone to that restaurant, or we were in Sydney and we didn't go to that restaurant either. That's really irritating. Yeah, we set a decent budget, and I mean, yeah, we ate our way around most of Asia. And like, I laugh about it now, but it got to a point that sometimes we were just so bored of trying to find a restaurant to go to, which sounds mad. Like now I would just be like just buzzing to be out there, but at some point we'd be like, oh, we've got to eat out again. Oh, this is rubbish. What are we going to do? And we'd be poring over sort of tourist books, and we were quite picky about where we wanted to go. If we were going to go spend money somewhere, we wanted it to be good. Yeah. So we'd end up just spending a lot of time researching these restaurants. But yeah, I think it was probably about 15-25%.
And did you try any new adventurous foods on your trip? Obviously, you get the scorpions and the like out there. Did you venture into any of that?
I drew the line at like insects and scorpions, but we did eat a lot of mad fruits, and we did eat a lot of sort of entrails. Yeah. Sort of like other parts. I think we went on a food tour in Kuala Lumpur, and like the first place the guy took us was like, eat that. I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's like, okay, and it was like this chewy, I don't know, like almost like beef jerky, and he was like, that's intestines. I was like, okay, cool, we're underway. What else have you got for me? Yeah. And the thing is, most people go, oh, and it was surprisingly good. No. I was happy to eat, but none of it was any good. And then in China, we ended up going to quite a lot of hot pot places, and the way they charge you is basically how many sticks you buy. And you go into a fridge, you pick up a plate, it has a load of sticks on, and then at the end they come up, weigh the sticks, and that's how much you pay. And we had Google Translate on our phone because English isn't very well spoken in some places we're going to in China. And you'd scan it, and it would just say like pork bits, and you'd be like, "Oh, that's a risky decision." Or you look at something and you'd be like entrails, and then it was like undecipherable entrails. And you'd be like, "Okay, we can probably leave that one to one side." Yeah. But then you just get bored, and you're like, that looks like chicken breast. We'll shove that on. It could be anything, I don't know. But once you stick it in a chili broth, yeah, and it cooks, it tastes pretty good. So yeah.
Yeah, nice. And is there a single country where you would say had the best food?
So my wife grew up for a little bit in Singapore when she was younger, and we always tried to go to Singapore because the food there is ridiculous. And I mean, I don't think I've seen much of Singapore other than the restaurants. We've been 3 or 4 times now, and we go for 3 or 4 days, and it's just we have this set routine of where we go. And I think the best places for food were the places where there is just a real mixed mash of cultures. So Malaysia and Singapore, with sort of Chinese, Indian, Malay influences, it just ended up being delicious. I mean, if I had to pick, Singapore would be the country, but if I had to pick one place, it'd be Georgetown, which is the main city on an island in Penang, which is sort of a couple of hours north of Kuala Lumpur. And it used to be sort of a free port. So you walk around the city, and there'd be sort of like British buildings, and there'd sort of be like Indian-based buildings, and there'd sort of be Chinese-type style buildings. And it's a real mixed mash of sort of cultures, but the food there was just ridiculous. And people rent stalls in the morning, and like one dude might do it on a Monday, and he might have the best, I don't know, hoisin duck on a Monday morning. And if you miss him, you can't find him again. So there was one day, I think we went to, it was actually on the corner near a hostel. We were quite fortunate. It was like Chinese pork char siu with just plain rice and like this lime juice. I cannot recreate it as hard as I try. I've been to so many restaurants where they're like, oh, best Malaysian char siu, lime juice. And I keep going, and every time I try it again, I'm like, this just isn't as good. I'm so disappointed. So I would thoroughly recommend going there. Yeah, so probably Singapore and Malaysia would be 2 places. But again, I think most places we went to, the food was very good. Just
because I love talking about food, I'm going to try and push you for a second best dish. If char siu is your top, what would you say for number 2?
That is so I'll have to go for a Singaporean dish. There's it's called murtabak, and it's I think it's sort of an Indian based dish, but essentially it's you can't really get it in the UK, and you can't really get it anywhere else. I don't know why. Even like pretty decent Singaporean restaurants, like there's Singapore Kitchen sort of in North London, and there's a place in Euston which does sort of Indian style, Malaysian style, Singaporean food. They don't do it, but it's basically you either have it with lamb or chicken, and it's layered lamb, like pancakes, but like phyllo pancakes, and they wrap it, and there's layers. So it's like layer of meat, layer of pancake, layer of meat, layer of pancake, and then it's covered in like a curry sauce. And it's just, I mean, it must be like 4,000 calories. It's ridiculous, but you know it's good when the guy who's serving you's got like a proper like he's not fat. He's got like a pot belly. He's got like he looks like he's going to have to like start taking injections, and it's like all centralized. Yeah, that would be my second dish, I think.
Nice.
We'll go with that.
And obviously earlier I mentioned that you went to some cooking classes. Did you pick up any tips from those which you're now implementing in the kitchen at home?
So it is really a good pestle and mortar is the main thing. Like make your own pastes. Like spend a lot of time making your own paste and freeze it and crush it and do those. But that's one thing. Other than that, it's just it's not too dissimilar to doing cooking at home. If you're like doing a stew, like if you cook something for a low temperature for a long time in a sauce, it's going to be tender. If you cook it hard, it's going to be harder. We love in this house garlic, chili, and onion as just a combination.
Me too, man.
So I think we use it all the time. And but other than that, no, I think the main thing is there's also stuff which you can't get in your typical shop. So in particular, sort of Chinese cooking, you can't get like red bean paste. You have to go to sort of Asian supermarkets to get hold of that. And likewise, Thai basil again you're starting to see a little bit more, but specifically Thai basil rather than just basil is a little bit hard to get hold of. So those sort of missing ingredients have always been a bit of a pain. But other than that, yeah, we love Asian food anyway, so we eat a lot of it, and I think it was mostly so we could come back and be like, okay, we can cook a banging rice dish and a banging noodle dish now, and we can cook for family and friends and feel confident that what we're making is authentic rather than making it up.
Amazing. I'm sure it tastes really, really good. So it's so good to hear about all the food of Southeast Asia. But now I want to talk about your Instagram account. So
okay, yeah.
It's at Just Ordinary Travelers if anyone wants to go back and have a look. But I loved following your trip. It was wanderlust basically from home. Obviously, we only met on that one occasion, but I kind of felt like I was following you as a couple around it. Where did that idea come from?
I am a relatively amateur photographer, and by amateur I mean I just have an SLR camera and I like to take it out with me, and I wanted to get better at photography, so it was like a targeted decision in that respect, and likewise we had friends and family who wanted to keep track of what we were up to and what we were doing, so I probably spent too much time, more than I needed to, like learning like proper photography skills, including Photoshop and tweaking images and all that type of stuff. So that was the main decision behind it, really.
Yeah, I was going to move on to the improvement because genuinely, when I was looking back today to get an idea of the content which you took whilst you're out there, the improvement is really evident as you go from the start all the way through. What kind of camera kit did you use when you're out there?
Thank you. Firstly, that's very kind of you to say. It was, I'm pleased you liked it. I literally had a Canon EOS 100D, which I got for my 21st birthday, so it was already 6 years old by then. I had the kit lens it came with. I had two other lenses, a long lens and a macro lens, and that was it. Nothing. I think you could probably get all of that gear probably for like 250 quid, if that, even cheaper. And then I had Photoshop as well, which I have just on my laptop. So, but I use that mostly for tweaking a couple of things and making it Instagrammable. I mean, it really was just a 9-month trip for me to improve my Instagram game. So.
Smashing it though, passed the test. Could you feel yourself improving throughout the 9 months? I
think I could. To be fair, I think I found myself taking less pictures as I went along. So I knew that I was getting a picture. I was like, okay, I know what I want to do with that, rather than taking, I think at the start I was taking just like 1,000 pictures and and towards the end, a day out, it might be like 200 pictures. So I was being much quicker. And the other thing as well is I got slightly more confident about what I wanted as I went along. So I didn't at any point really feel particularly comfortable asking to take pictures of people, because I think when you're going to someone's space, I think that's quite an intimidating thing to do, especially as a tourist. You don't want to be going up to somebody like, oh, can I take your picture? Because one, it can either be a little bit condescending, or two, it's a little bit like I don't feel that confident doing it. But as I got along, I felt more comfortable either taking like candid pictures of people, or going up to people and asking them to take pictures. And I think there's one I have of a monk in Beijing, staring out of his window, watching a sort of a procession go past. And I think it's one of the only pictures we have on our walls from our trip. And I absolutely love it because it's a real candid moment. And he obviously, I don't think he was aware of I was taking it, but it was which probably isn't worse than actually asking him if he wanted me to take it in the first place. But it was at that point I was like, okay, actually this is I'm quite happy with this and where it's got to. And likewise, I had friends and family blowing up my DMs saying how great this was. So it was a bit of a confidence boost as we went along too.
Nice. And you mentioned the photo of the monk, but is that your favourite photo you took on your trip?
No, the favourite photo I took on my trip was, and this is actually going to be a little bit soppy, but it's the picture of my wife with her engagement ring on in Times Square. Well, not Times Square, it was at Rockefeller Center, because we got engaged on our last night of the trip, which was again another complication to kind of plan. So that was my favorite picture because it's sort of a very candid picture of the two of us where we were by ourselves. No one else knew we'd been engaged at that point, so it sort of has a special memory. If I had to pick an actual traveling picture, then I've got a couple. There's one in Beijing of the monk. There's one of the Great Wall of China where there's like a imposing one in the foreground, and you kind of see it winding it behind in the background, or there's a couple I've got of sort of baby orangutans which just melt my heart every time I look at them. So those would kind of be my I guess my few favourites.
And that's an amazing segue as well onto your engagement story, because I had it written down in that exact order to move on to your engagement.
Oh, nice.
Because when I was at home, and obviously I've followed your trip, that trip and seeing it end in the proposal was almost like a fairy tale in a way. I remember being made up by the fact that you got engaged.
Thanks, mate. It's I think it was partly because me and my wife had been together for about I think 8 or 9 years, and so it was kind of expected. There was never any doubt that we were going to get married. She has always liked the idea of getting engaged in New York at Christmas, which is a very cliche type thing. But again back to my point of like, well, if you're in New York at Christmas, you might as well get engaged, right? So it was a really nice end of the trip. And also I think the other thing it did for us was you come away from this sort of, at that point, coming up to nearly 2-year period where all you've been doing is planning, doing. And I think if we come back to the UK in January, it was already going to be the mother of January blues. And not to have anything to kind of look forward to would have been quite difficult. So it was a little bit of like, okay, if we have something else to look forward to, we can start sort of putting our mind towards that as well. But it was nice. I mean, it was a complete surprise for her, which was really good. Her parents had actually joined us in Sydney, sort of 3 months prior, and I'd done the typical thing of asking them if I could marry their daughter, and her dad spat the beer out, and her mum burst into tears while Georgia was getting drinks. Wow. I know. So Georgia came back with a tray of sort of pints because we're at a pub, and her mum's, we're sat outside but underneath a big canopy, like we're completely in the shade. I just had to put her sunglasses on, and it's just like I can just see her like gently sobbing as because she can't believe what, I'm going to propose. And then I had the complication of getting the engagement ring, which I got in the States. Had to ship it to a friend who again I worked with, who was in New York at the time, Tom McGovern, who was an absolute hero and looked after the ring for me, dropped it off to my hotel before we got there. And it was lovely. The only downside of it was, and it's not a downside, but it was again a late complication, was I booked this sort of last night in New York, flying back to the UK the next day. I booked us the Rainbow Rooms at the top of the Rockefeller Center, and you can go up there. You don't have to pay to book a table. You can go up there, get drinks. You can get one of the best views in New York. I think it's higher than the Empire State Building viewing platform. I think it is, but you don't have to pay $50 to get there. Anyway, I was promised that this sort of place would be like, relatively intimate, like you can have like a private one-to-one conversation. And at this point, I think it must be like the 20th of December, 19th of December. We get there and it is like table. I was rubbing elbows with a dude next to me. So we sat there having a drink. I don't really remember much from the rest of the day because I was panicking the entire day. In the opposite corner to where we are, there's a proposal. And the room erupts in cheers and chants of USA goes on. And as my wife is clapping, sort of smiling politely at the new couple, she leans over to me and she says, "I'd absolutely hate it if you did that to me." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." So panic stations hit. And thankfully, my obsession with photography again got me through, because I went and spoke to the barman and was like, "Look, I want to propose. That's really just put me off. I don't want chance of USA going around this bar. I've been taking lots of photos. I see you're setting up a room there, which is in pitch black. It's sort of the other side of the building. I think they were setting up for a conference or something. Can I, when we leave, pop in there, propose and then we'll be gone. You know, if you could pretend to be irritated, I'm asking you if we can go in there, that'd be really helpful. And he was like, sir, absolutely not a problem at all. He takes, you know, we pay our bill, I ask him, and he kind of really goes, oh, if you have to, and sort of drags us through. So I take my pictures, and then as I'm putting my camera away, I pull out of a ring, didn't get down on one knee, absolutely panicked, didn't get down on one knee, passed her on the ring. She then told me to F off, sort of as tears erupted, we got engaged, and then the same dude who'd just been very rude to me came with 2 glasses of champagne on the house, as we had sort of this very private moment, sort of overlooking New York by ourselves. So by all accounts, I did very well according to my wife's friends. So I would highly recommend it.
Oh, amazing story, mate, and a fairy tale ending to your trip as well. Is there a place that you would go back to from your trip?
Yeah, so we're actually planning to go back to Bangkok. I mean, I'll go back to most of it, to be fair. I would maybe hold off going back to India immediately. Most places we went to in Southeast Asia, and again, if you can afford to go to Australia and New Zealand just like as a holiday, then yeah, you would. But we're actually planning to go to Bangkok next year for our 30th birthdays. So I think we're going at the start of next June, you know, all things being well, with obviously the pandemic. So that's the current plan. And then we're going to go to the Thai Islands, sort of south, which we didn't do when we were traveling. We went north. So again, going to a city we loved, and then doing a different part of the country, which we didn't do when we were traveling. So that is my other plan. But yeah, we'll definitely be going back to places we've been to before, but again, trying to add a little bit more of a spin to what we did.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you would go back to everywhere, but is there a place perhaps that you wouldn't go back to?
Yeah, I mean, Medan, which is the capital city of Sumatra, I really struggled with. Yeah, I mean, it took us 2.5 hours to drive 30 kilometers from the airport to our hostel, which kind of gives you the indication of the traffic there. We were pretty central, couldn't find anywhere to eat. Yeah, really struggled. North Samatra is amazing because it has the orangutans in the north, and I think it's not Bukit Lawang. The village we stayed in when we went to go see the orangutans was really sweet, and there were some really good food places there. But yeah, if you do plan going to North Sumatra, stay in Medan for as little time as you possibly can. Ideally, don't go at all. That would be my slightly harsh recommendation, I think.
That's good to hear. If you had to pick a favourite country from your entire trip, which would you choose?
Oh, Alex, these questions
mate, I'm sorry.
These questions are really difficult. I think the country which took us by surprise is China. I don't know why. I don't know whether it's because of just a lack of education around the country generally or whatever. I think we had expected China to be way more run down, way less organized, way less, you know, tourist friendly. I think probably even not even tourist friendly, but like outsider friendly than we expected. But we were continually blown away by the friendliness of people, by the reliability of places, by, you know, I mean, it sounds silly, but, you know, even things like ordering a cab, like, of course there's an app in China where you can order a cab. Like, of course there is, but you don't think about that when you go into it. So, you know, the subways being super clean, and like one thing which stands out for me, we're in Chongqing, which is sort of north of, if you go sort of directly north right into the country from Hong Kong, it's sort of up there. It's near Chengdu, which is where the pandas are, and we're going on the subway, and most of it was in Chinese. Obviously, there's a couple of, you know, most of the major cities have English signs, but most of them don't. And we didn't know where we were going, and this dude got off. He was on the platform with us, and we pointed where we need to go, and he was like, "Okay, follow me." And he got on the train, and he stood with us. He stood with us for like 6 stops, got off, and then as he got off, he grabbed a guard who then took us outside. As we were leaving, I saw that he got back onto the other side of the platform to go back where he came. So he'd obviously come with us purely to show us, but, you know, he went the opposite direction that he needed to go purely to show us where we should go.
Wow.
And that was, you know, that was fairly atypical. Again, that hot pot restaurant I was talking about earlier. The waitress didn't speak a word of English. We obviously didn't speak a word of Mandarin. She has sort of got the menus in front of her face, and as she puts them down on our table, she sees us and she just panics. She just goes. she like clearly just panics, and she holds her hands up and sort of wait, and then she just ran off down the street, and we were like, oh, have we done something awful? What's going to happen here? No, it turns out that there's a dude that she knows in a couple of restaurants down the road who speaks English, and she went and grabbed him and pulled him up to go speak to us. Wow. And all he said was like, she wants to know what you'd like to eat. I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So I think China was, don't listen to all the stories you hear in the media. It is an insane country, full of culture, full of smiles and laughs, and people who went above and beyond, I think, friendliness we experienced in other countries to sort of make sure that we felt like everyone else around us.
So good to hear. It's a country which you've just added to my bucket list. So there we go.
100%.
Is there a favourite city from your whole trip?
I'm going to give you three.
Yeah, of course, man.
We discovered pretty early on that we were slightly more cosmopolitan. We liked being in the bigger cities. I really liked Hong Kong. I really liked Bangkok. I really liked Singapore. I actually have a list. I'll send it to you afterwards. So you can see we actually ranked every single city we went to. As you've seen in my spreadsheets, we're very organised. I actually ranked every single one, but Hong Kong. I mean, we were obviously there before, sort of they're having difficulties they're having now, so it might be slightly different now. But again, I think being British, there's a lot of English signs around. Like, people are very warm and welcoming to British people. There's a lot of British culture still there, and the food was really good. The people were really friendly, but it kind of had an underside where you went, oh, if you really wanted to, you could do some mad stuff here. Like, if you wanted to go and get really boozed up with some randoms you've never met and just be taken into the dark of the city and come out sort of bleary-eyed the next day, you probably could. Similarly, Bangkok had that type of vibe, and Bangkok really surprised us. Again, I don't know what we were expecting, but a really super modern cosmopolitan city which had high-rise cocktail bars and seedy underground noodle bars which went sort of side by side, and that was really cool. And I think, as I said before, we really like Singapore as a city, which is almost like the opposite of Hong Kong, where there's not much of a seedy underside. Yeah. Singapore is very clean, and there's chewing gum is banned and all that type of stuff. But those three cities stood out, and of course New York, and loads of places.
Yeah,
loads of places. Mumbai.
I'm a bit cruel for making you pick one, I suppose.
Yeah. If you had a gun to my head and was like, which one? Well, but then again, it's like, which one would I live in and which one would I visit? Are like completely different situations. I think I would quite happily go live in Hong Kong. I think I could see myself living there. Whereas likewise, Bangkok, I could see myself staying for a couple of weeks, but maybe not living and working there. But
Is living abroad something you've ever wanted to do?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'd like to, but it's difficult, isn't it? You've got to be almost in the right time, the right place. And my wife's career is probably slightly more geared up to being able to work abroad. She works sort of within global markets, so it's slightly easy for her. Whereas for me, I'm sport. It's very sport specific, so I kind of have to go where where the money in the sports are, and that's predominantly in the West or the US. I could go. I don't know what I'd be adding to, the Hong Kong Rugby Sevens particularly, and again, but that's not going to be a centralised race. So, it's definitely not. It comes back to our chat earlier about commitments, right? We've got a dog now, we've got a mortgage now. We're probably not very far from wanting to start thinking about having kids. So, all of those things tie into it. So, it's definitely not off the cards, but I think it's getting harder, I'd imagine.
Yeah. And I want to touch on life after traveling. So after being away for 9 months and living this amazing dream lifestyle, how hard was it to come back to normal life?
Well, I think we had a little bit of a honeymoon period because we came back over Christmas. So, we landed back on the 21st of December, and then we went and surprised our friends at a Christmas party that evening, which was quite nice. And then we sort of had we gave ourselves 10 days to kind of settle back into a normal routine and not be worrying about things. And I think in fairness, after 9 months, we were pretty ready to come home. We're done sort of being on the move all the time. We were a little bit done with trains, planes, automobiles. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, we started gearing ourselves up for returning. I think the biggest thing which we realised very quickly was all the panics, all the fear we had about readjusting and getting a job and being normal again were kind of relatively unfounded. We both ended up getting a job pretty quickly. Good jobs as well, not just panic and grab the first job we can. We were able to be a little bit picky. So I think the other thing as well is that just that whole process has given us so much more confidence about what we do just generally. Going through that experience and knowing, okay, even just as a couple being okay, we've been with each other literally for 9 months. I don't think there was a single point where we were the longest time we were apart was maybe 2 hours, if that. I think that's because Jordan was feeling unwell one evening, and I went out to eat by myself, and that was it. We were like conjoined twins for 9 months, which would have been awkward if I'd then proposed and she said no. But yeah, she's like, no, the trip's really made me reassess my situation. So no, we actually didn't find adjusting too difficult. But I can imagine that if you came back and you felt like you hadn't done the stuff you wanted to do, that it would be very difficult. And even now, I every now and then I'm like, we could just go traveling again.
Yeah.
Like, we could just we take the dog with us now. It's fine. We could just go traveling. And I think George is less convinced than I am. But yeah.
And I'm sure I know the answer to this question, but would you urge people to do the same?
Yeah, I would. I really would. And I think it taught us as much about ourselves as it did other people. And the biggest thing you could take away from it is basically everyone's the same. You know, people want to go for a drink. They want to spend time with their family. They want to put a roof above their heads, and they want to eat good food. And that is true from not just the people you'll meet, but the people who live in the countries you go to as well. And there's a universal truth in I think this is why food is so important, that you can kind of sit down and have a meal with someone and you're having a shared experience. And in a world which is sort of increasingly feeling divided, it was quite nice to go away and remember that actually there's probably more. We have more in common than what separates us. So in that respect, it was very important. And also likewise, it was just a ridiculous experience. I mean, we did things that I didn't think we'd ever think we'd do. And as I said, I still bore people to this day with stories from traveling, to the point where I think even now they're getting a little bit bored. We're like, yes, Christian, you know you went traveling, which is going to be hilarious when I'm publicising this podcast. Like, hey, did you guys know that I went traveling? Someone actually asked me to speak about it, which is I often don't need much prompting to do. So I would thoroughly recommend it. But you know, everybody's circumstances are different. You know, you've got to do what's best for you. And I'm not saying go for 9 months, but I'd be very surprised if after this pandemic is over and, you know, people are starting to figure out their life balance a little bit more, and, you know, working from Zoom is, you know, slightly more feasible, but it's not going to be an easier thing for people to do. I mean, George's boss was in Thailand when the pandemic hit, and she worked in Thailand for 5 months. Wow. We met a couple when we were traveling from Sweden. Their company had said, yeah, go traveling, go live in Australia, carry on working, carry on doing the hours that you do. And, you know, fortunately they worked jobs which were able to be done remotely, and they had awful waking up times. Yeah. But again, they could wake up at 4 a.m, work until midday, have the afternoon, do whatever they wanted, have a nice meal, and then sort of get some sleep before the next morning. So I think it's going to be easy for people to do, and the positives massively outweigh the negatives.
Oh, Christian, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Loved hearing your stories. And if people want to see some stunning photography from your trip, it's just Ordinary Travellers. Christian, it's been a pleasure, man.
Thank you, mate.